Hey everyone, Johnny here and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be looking at how to calculate the value of your superannuation after so many years of having contributions made by your employer or by yourself into a superannuation fund. But before we get into that, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel now, like the video if you enjoy it, and comment below if you have any questions. So let's have a look at an example here. Let's say you make $100,000 every year for the duration of your profession. Now, obviously, that is a simplifying assumption. In real life, it is very likely that your salary would increase over time up to a certain point, or at least it would change. But to illustrate the point of this, I'm going to assume that you earn the same salary between 25 and 60 years of age, okay? And that is going to be a $100,000 salary that you get paid by an employer. So between 25 and 60, you are going to make $100,000. Now, that is 35 years of making $100,000 as a salary. Now, that is a gross salary, so I need you to remember that word. It's gross salary, which means it's before tax. So that is what your contract will say that you earn, but what you will have to do afterwards is then figure out how much tax you owe the government, because obviously that's how the government makes its money. That's how it can afford to pay for things for society, such as hospitals and roads and whatnot. So they actually tax people. So you would get taxed based on this $100,000, which would then leave you with a net salary. So this is not the net salary, but you would get a net salary after tax had been removed. So the net salary is the amount that actually ends up in your bank account. Okay, where does super come into this? Well, let's just say you're making $100,000 gross salary, and that's the relevant type of salary we want to look at. Don't worry about the net salary after tax. So let's say you make $100,000. Your employer has to pay a certain percentage on that amount and put that into your superannuation fund. So they actually have to pay you more than $100,000. They have to pay you $100,000 plus a certain percentage on top. Now, what that percentage is, I'm going to say for this example, is 10%. At the time that I was recording this, in Australia, it was 9.5%. But this year it is set to go up to 10%, and in about 4 or 5 years, it's actually going to go up to 12%. But for now, let's assume that the superannuation contribution that is mandatory, that the employer has to make for you if you work for them, is going to be 10% of your gross salary. So every year, your employer is going to pay you $100,000. You're not going to receive that full $100,000 because of tax, so that will reduce. But on top of the $100,000, they are also going to put 10% of that $100,000 into your superannuation fund. Now, in this case, that is $10,000. Now, that's $10,000 in addition to the $100,000. Okay, so sometimes in a contract, it may say that you're going to get paid $100,000 inclusive of super. If it says that it includes super, then obviously you would have to reduce this amount to figure out what your actual gross salary was if it already had super inbuilt. But here we're going to assume that you make $100,000 and then they owe you another $10,000. Now, what does it mean for it to go into super? What we mean by going into super is that this $10,000 won't actually go into your bank account. Even though they owe you that money, it's a special type of payment that the government makes compulsory because they want people to have lots of money remaining for them when they retire. Let's just say you were going to retire at 60, so you're going to work for 35 years. Well, instead of trusting you to save up money for 35 years, the government basically doesn't trust us and says that the employer will have to put in $10,000 on our behalf into a special bank account, if you like, a super fund. It's a special type of bank account, or it's a special type of account for our money that we're not allowed to touch until we're at least 60 years old. Okay, so it's a special type of account that your money goes into. The employer does it for you, so you never actually have to do this. And that money is locked inside there until you're allowed to touch it at 60. So this makes a lot of sense because we can imagine there would be a whole lot of people who wouldn't be able to save that money, or they wouldn't have the discipline to actually save that 10% every year and not be tempted to touch it and spend it on things that they want to buy. So you never actually get to see this or touch it, but it is your money. Now that money doesn't just go into a simple bank account. It doesn't just sit there and do nothing. What they do is they want that $10,000 every year to actually accumulate. They want it to grow. So they put this into a super fund. Now, a super fund, that is a superannuation fund. A super fund is actually just a company, basically, that will hold your money. You can think about it like putting money into a bank, and they have a bank account for you, although it's not the same as a bank, because this company who holds your money, that $10,000 every year, special type of bank account for you, they're actually going to then invest that money. They are going to invest that money in different types of assets to help you make more money. So we want that $10,000 each year to become more than $10,000. We want to use the power of compound interest or compounding returns to help you build that 10,000 to a bigger number. How do you do that? Well, a simple example is to put that money into an actual bank account, right? You could call that a term deposit or a government bond or something of the kind, right? So we could say you could put that money into a term deposit. Remember, this company here, your super fund, you're not actually going to see all this go on. You can have some control over this, but the super fund, the super company, is going to put some of that $10,000 into a term deposit with a bank, and that is going to make you interest. So you get interest, which is money on top of the $10,000. They may also put money into shares. And a share of a company means that you own part of a company, technically, even though you might not even know about it. You are owning companies that will then make profits, hopefully, if it's a good investment. And if they make profits, you get paid dividends. And dividends are just a share of the profit. So if a company makes a lot of profit one year and you own 50% of the company, then you may get 50% of that profit. Okay, but it's much more likely that you'll own a very tiny percent of a big company. But you still get dividends, which is just the equivalent of interest. So this is all money you're earning on top of the 10,000, even though you only start with 10,000 in the first year. Okay, they may also put money into real estate. They may buy some property. Now you might think, how are they going to buy real estate? How are they going to buy me units or a house with only 10,000? Well, because it's a fund, the word fund means that there are lots of people having their $10,000 super put into the same account. You all share the account. And what they do is they pool all the money together so that they're able to actually buy things such as real estate. Because if you had 100 people paying $10,000, then that's $1 million. And then you can probably buy some property. And then you all get to share, you all share part of the income that comes from that, because you'll be making rental income. Or if we later sell the property that we bought for a higher amount, you will also get what's called a capital gain. That is the difference between the amount that you bought the property for and the amount it was sold for. So there's another kind of profit there. Okay, and there are a few types of investments. There's more types of assets. We call these things assets because you can put your money into them and hopefully you'll make more money at the end. A bank account where you put your savings and where you make interest each month, that's the most basic type of asset that you are probably familiar with. But there are lots of different types, and basically the employer will be forced to put 10% of your salary into this fund of yours. So it's your money. You're not allowed to touch it. And then that company is authorized to actually then make all of these contributions on your behalf. They're doing it for you so that you can hopefully make that $10,000 a much bigger amount. Okay, so that's what's happening behind the scenes of super. We are doing all of this to try and make what's called compounding returns. So we want the returns to get bigger. The returns, when I say returns, I mean the amount of money you're getting on top of that $10,000. So if you make a 10% return on $10,000, right? So you make 10%, or let's say 5%, so we don't confuse it with that. If you make 5% return in a year on $10,000, then you have made $500 on top of the $10,000. And what the super fund will do with that $500 at the end of every year is they'll reinvest it. So now no longer is that 10,000, it's 10,500. So that means that the next time you make 5%, you're making 5% not on 10,000, but on 10,500, which is going to be an even bigger amount. So the amount that you keep getting back, think about it, it's a return because it's money that goes back to you, actually get bigger and bigger. That's the aim, because they are going to reinvest all of the interest and the profit and everything you make. They reinvest the money you earn back into the assets. They reinvest the money you earn straight back into these assets, what we're calling assets, such as a bank account, such as a share of a company. These are assets. These are things that you own that will help pay you some more money later, hopefully. Okay, so hopefully you understand the idea of super now. So let's have a look at an example of how you would actually find the value of your superannuation fund after 35 years in this example. So we're going to make one more assumption here before we do that, and that is that when the money goes into the super fund, and when the super fund makes all of these investments, we are going to assume, and this is based on real life data that I've looked up, we're going to assume that you are going to make about 6% per year. So you are going to make 6% per year on top. I used 5% as an example, but 6% is closer to the reality of how these super funds have typically performed. Okay, so that $10,000 will typically generate $600 in this example, because I'm multiplying that by 6%. It will generate $600 on top. So $10,000 after 1 year will be worth $10,600. And then the next year, we would times $10,600 by 6% to work out what it becomes then. And that's what compounding means, because the money that you make each year keeps going back in, and so you make even more money the following year. Okay, we're also going to assume here that the money you make is going to compound. It's going to be added annually. So assume that you get paid every year on top of that $10,000 by the fund, right, through all of these assets. So they will recalculate the returns, the money you've made every year. That's not necessarily true in real life, but we're going to do that to simplify this example. Okay, so let's have a look at what happens to your money. So you know you have at the end of year 1, the amount in your account of your super, remember, this is an account you can't touch. It's not a normal bank account, but the amount, this is the total amount. Total amount at the end of year 1, that's what that represents, A1. I just use this small 1 here in the right corner. It's called subscript 1, just to represent after 1 year. The total amount in your account after 1 year, well, your employer has had to pay $10,000, remember, at the start of the year, we'll assume. And by the end of the year, you are going to make 6% based on this number here. You're going to make 6% on top. So the value of your super is going to be $10,000 plus 6% of $10,000. Because remember, the value still includes the original $10,000. It's not like you're only getting the 6% back. You're going to get $10,000 plus the 6%, okay? So you're going to get $10,000 plus 6% of that $10,000, right? The simpler way to write this is simply that you are going to get $10,000 times 1. We are factorizing the $10,000 out here. You're going to get $10,000 bracket 1 because you still have your $10,000. Think about if you expanded this bracket, it would be 10,000 times 1. Well, of course you still have 10,000, but you also have 6% as well now, because after the first year, you have made some money on your investment. Okay, so you actually have $10,000, and I'm going to express this now as a decimal. 6% is 0.06, And 1 plus 0.06 is 1.06. So that's the amount, that's the expression that I would use after 1 year. After 2 years, the amount of your investment is going to be this. It's going to be whatever you had at the end of the first year. So it's going to be whatever you had at the end of the first year, which is this amount. Let's write that amount in green. Plus, what's happened? Well, after another year of working for your employer, they have to pay you another 10%. They have to do this every year on top of your salary. Remember, your salary still is $100,000. We're assuming it's the same salary every year. And because of that, they have to keep paying you $10,000. So not only do you have that amount from the end of the first year, but now they've had to make an additional contribution of $10,000. Okay, so in the account now is the original amount from the end of the previous year, I should say, not the original, but at the end of the first year, that amount, plus the new 10,000. And all of that, of course, is going to be multiplied by the gain that you make, which is going to be 1 plus 6%. Because the new $10,000 that got put in at the start of the second year has now earned 6%, while the amount that was already in there gets another 6%. And this is the idea of compound interest here. So we actually multiply this bracket here by 1.06. And if you actually expand that and we multiply both of these terms, see there's two terms here separated by the plus sign, and we multiply both of them by 1.06, what you'll see is that you end up with $10,000 up here times 1.06 squared, because you have the same bracket multiplying. And then you have this other $10,000 out here, which didn't have a bracket next to it, which will now have 1.06 next to it. So what you're seeing here is this pattern emerging where it's just going to keep being 10,000, and then it's going to be a bracket with 1.06 that just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and then it goes down. So after 3 years, hopefully you can see now that really it would just end up being $10,000, and you could repeat the same process we just did there, 1.06 cubed. That's a 3 there, okay? Because that first contribution has now earned interest 3 times. So the 1.06 times itself 3 times. So that represents the very first $10,000 from here at the start of that year. And then this here represents the second $10,000 that got put in at the start of the second year. But because that's been in the account for 2 years now, it has received 6% twice. And then our latest $10,000 has only been in there for 1 year, so that receives 6% once. So remember, it's 1.06 because not only is the $10,000 still $10,000, but it's adding 6% onto it. So that's how we represent that. Okay, so what's the general pattern emerging here? The general pattern, we don't want to keep doing this for 35 years. Remember, I'm interested in what this is all going to be worth at the end of 35 years. Okay, so if I want to work out the amount in my super fund, in my super account, at the end of any particular year, then what I can notice here is that a pattern is emerging where everything always has $10,000 at the front there. So we can actually factorize the $10,000 out. What I'm doing now is I'm factorizing the $10,000 out. See how all 3 terms here and any other terms that we kept adding on in years after would all have $10,000. And then what we see here is we just start with the 1.06, so I can present this in the opposite order here, but it's just going to multiply 1.06, and then it's going to add 1.06 squared. See how I've got this first one, now I'm doing the second one, plus the third one. It doesn't matter that I have reversed the order here. And what's going to happen is that is just going to keep going until we get to the particular year that we're up to based on what we're looking at. So if we're looking at the 10th year, then this would go all the way up in ascending order, or descending if we had done it the other way. But again, that doesn't matter. This is just for simplicity. Is going all the way up to 1.06 to the power of 10. But that was in the example of 10. Really, it's just going to be whatever n is. So if we're looking at the 35th year, that is going to go all the way up to 35. Now, the important thing to recognize here is that this is actually a geometric progression or a geometric sequence. Because these numbers are adding on, this is just a sum of a GP, because these numbers, 1.06, 1.06 squared, are adding on to each other, but they're multiplying to get from one to the next. There's just a pattern whereby they are multiplying by the same number each time. They are all multiplying by 1.06 to get to the next one, because we would multiply each one by 1.06 to get to the next term within this bigger bracket. So ignore the $10,000 for a second, that can stay out the front, but we have a geometric progression within the square brackets here, whereby the first term, and this is why I reversed the order, is 1.06, and the ratio, the common ratio between all of these is 1.06 as well, because the common ratio is the number by which each term is multiplied to get to the next one. And if it's the same each time, you have what's called a GP. And the number of terms inside corresponds exactly with the number of years that we're looking at. Okay, so I say n equals n. As in, if that was 10, there would be 10 terms in this bracket. That's what that means by n equals n. Whatever n is there is the same number of terms in the bracket. Okay, great. So now we can use a shortcut to actually find the sum of all of these terms inside the square bracket. Okay, so we are going to use our knowledge of GPs, and if you don't know that yet, you can look at it in another video where I look at GPs in more detail. But we are actually going to use a formula. Okay, so we are going to use a formula that basically says that the sum of a GP is the same as, so this is a to the n, is going to equal $10,000, right? And then I'm going to put the sum of the GP in this way, because I know the sum of a GP is given by, a bracket, the ratio to the power of n minus 1, all over the ratio minus 1. Okay, so I'm going to put that here. So we are going to times the 10,000. I'll do a bigger square bracket around all of it, just to separate the smaller bracket. So we've got 10,000 at the front, just like it was up here. But now we're doing the sum of GP formula next to it. It's multiplying by it, right? So we have $10,000 times A. We said A was 1.06. And then that multiplies by 1.06 to the power of n. And we minus 1. And then we divide by 1.06 minus 1. So I'm just following the formula there. Okay, so what are we left with? 10,000 bracket 1.06 bracket 1.06 to the n minus 1 all over, what's 1.06 minus 1? Well, 0.06. And we do a square bracket. And now we have an expression that we could use to find any particular year's value at the end, right? So the value after 35 years is what we're interested in. So we are going to sub 35 for this n here. Okay, so the value after 35 years is simply going to be $10,000 times whatever this comes out when we substitute n for 35. So you place 35 there where it says n, because that's the number of years. And if you put all of that into your calculator right now, so we've just followed that formula very simply, you are going to get the amount, and I'll just get it here from my calculator, $1,181,208 and approximately 67 cents. So I've done some rounding there. Wow, well, that's a lot of money. So your account is worth over $1 million. Now, that's interesting, because if you look at how much money has gone into your account over the 35 years, well, your employer, the person who employs you, has done 35 payments of $10,000. So if you hadn't earned any interest, if you hadn't actually put your money into an investment, and your employer was saving your $10,000 themselves in their house, putting it in a money box, a big money box, they would have only saved you $350,000. But instead, the government makes them put it into a super fund with people who know how to invest money and make more money. And your $300,000 that was put in on your behalf by the employer has grown to $1,181,208.67 due to the power of compound interest or compounding returns. Because all the money you kept making each year got put back into the fund, and it helped you make even more money each time. And that's the idea of superannuation. That is how you can calculate, using some simplifying assumptions, of course, roughly what your super should be worth if you are making a certain contribution each year. Hope that helps, guys. If you enjoyed the video, please like, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.